For as long as I can remember, my father called me too pretty to be his daughter. Warren Hargrove said my blonde hair and blue eyes were proof of my mother's betrayal. He treated me like evidence of a crime she never committed. And when he demanded I take a DNA test before he'd walk me down the aisle, I finally agreed. But the results didn't just prove him wrong about the affair. They proved I wasn't his daughter, or my mother's. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Fairfield, Connecticut. My mother, Carolyn, clutched her linen napkin like a lifeline. My grandmother, Vivienne, watched Warren the way a hawk watches a snake. My brother, Brendan, kept his eyes on his plate. And then Warren cleared his throat. "I won't be attending your wedding, Sloane." He slid a folded document across the table toward me. A consent form for a DNA paternity test. His name already signed at the bottom. "Take the test," he said, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "Make the results public to the family. If you're mine, I'll be there. I'll even apologize." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But we both know what the test will show." I didn't sign the paper that night. I simply said, "Thank you for the reminder, Warren. I'll remember this." And I meant every word. By 28, I'd learned that my father's cruelty followed a pattern, predictable as the tide, twice as relentless. I was 7 the first time I understood I was different. At 12, I wanted to join a school volleyball team. Warren refused to sign the permission slip. "I'm not investing in someone else's kid," he told me, right in front of Brendan, who got new baseball cleats that same week. When I got accepted to nursing school, Warren looked at me across that same dining table and said, "Your real father can pay for yours." So I took out loans. I worked double shifts at a diner. I graduated 6 years later with $60,000 in debt and a degree I'd earned without his help. The night before I left for college, my grandmother Vivienne pulled me aside. "Keep every document from the hospital where you were born," she said, her grip firm on my wrist. "Your birth certificate, any paperwork. I have a feeling we might need them someday." I didn't understand then, but I kept the papers. And 18 years later, I'd finally learned why she told me to. That night, I drove back to my apartment in Hartford. Declan was waiting on the couch, his laptop open to floor plans for a client. He knew immediately something was wrong. "Maybe you should just do it," he said finally. "Take the test, prove him wrong once and for all." I set down my wine glass and looked at the modest diamond on my finger. Declan had designed the ring himself, based on a sketch I'd drawn years ago in a journal. "It's not about proving him wrong anymore," I said. "It's about freeing my mother." 5 years ago, I'd gotten a call from Vivienne at 2 in the morning. She'd found Carolyn in the bathroom with an empty bottle of sleeping pills. The paramedics arrived in time, but just barely. Warren never apologized. He never even acknowledged what his 23 years of accusations had done to her. My mother gave that man 35 years of complete faithfulness, and he repaid her with 28 years of calling her a liar. 2 weeks later, Warren turned 60. Halfway through dinner, after 3 glasses of wine, he stood up to give a speech. He thanked everyone for coming, praised Brendan for his career in finance, raised a glass to Carolyn for her patience. Then his eyes found me. "You know what they call a bird that lays its eggs in another bird's nest?" he said. "A cuckoo. The cuckoo's egg looks beautiful, but it doesn't belong. It never did." Somewhere behind me, an ant gasped. My mother stared at her lap, tears dripping onto her bracelet. I stood up, picked up my things, and said, "Thank you for the reminder, Warren. I'll remember this." Then I took my mother's hand and we walked out together. My grandmother caught up to us in the parking lot. She led us to a bench overlooking the golf course and dropped her voice to a whisper. "The night you were born, something strange happened at St. Thayer, Mary's hospital." She pulled out a yellowed piece of paper from her purse. "The nurse who brought you out." Her hands were shaking. She handed you to Carolyn too quickly and practically ran out of the room. I looked at the document, a copy of my birth record. Time of birth, 11:47 p.m. "I gave birth at 11:58, Carolyn said slowly. "I remember looking at the clock. The doctor made a joke about almost being a leap day baby. 11 minutes. Something had happened in those 11 minutes. "There's a name," Vivienne said. "The head nurse that night, Ruth Calloway. She retired 10 years ago. I have her address." The next morning, I walked into a certified Hartford genetics lab with 3 DNA samples: mine, my mother's, which she'd given me voluntarily, and my father's, taken from a hairbrush she kept in the guest bathroom. 3 weeks later, the results arrived at 9.47 on a Tuesday night. I entered my password, verified my identity, opened the PDF, and read it 3 times because the first 2 times the words didn't make sense. Subject A shows 0% genetic match with Warren Hargrove. I'd expected that. But then came the second line. Subject A shows 0% genetic match with Carolyn Hargrove. I stopped breathing. I called the lab's after-hours line, demanding to speak with someone. A technician walked me through the results. No contamination. No errors. No possibility of a mistake. I was not related to either of my parents, which meant my mother had never cheated. Warren had been wrong about that for 28 years. But if Carolyn hadn't had an affair, if she'd been faithful like she'd always claimed, then how was I not her biological daughter? I drove to my parents' house the next morning and handed Carolyn my phone with the report on the screen. I watched the color drain from her face. "This is wrong," she whispered. "I gave birth to you. I was in labor for 14 hours. I felt you. You were red and screaming and mine." I took her ice-cold hands in mine. "I believe you," I said, which means there's only one explanation. Something happened at the hospital. Someone switched us. I called Ruth Calloway again and again, 5 times in 3 days, each call going straight to voicemail. On the 6th try, I left a different message. "Mrs. Calloway, I have certified, legally admissible DNA evidence proving a baby was switched at St. Mary's Hospital on March 15, 1997. I'm not looking to blame you, I just need to know who I am. If you don't call me back, my next call will be to a lawyer." 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thursday, 2 p.m. Riverside Diner, Bridgeport. "Come alone." Ruth Calloway sat in the front of the booth, her back to the wall, her hands trembling against her coffee cup. She was 72, smaller than I'd imagined, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked up when I slid into the seat across from her. "You look just like her," she said quietly. "Claire, your biological mother. Same hair, same eyes." She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Her shift log from March 15, 1997. She opened it to a flagged page and slid it across the table. 11:47 p.m. Baby girl number 1, born to Carolyn Hargrove. 11:58 p.m. Baby girl number 2, born to Claire Holloway. 12:32 a.m. Trainee nurse mixed up infants after bathing. Error realized at 2:15 a.m. Both families had already bonded. 2045 a.m. Meeting with hospital administrator. Decision made to correct records, not families. NDA required for all staff present. "They knew," I whispered. "They knew that night and they covered it up." Ruth nodded, her voice cracking. "I was 24 years old. They threatened my license, my pension. I had 2 kids of my own to feed." She pulled out another piece of paper, a printed social media profile. A woman my age, brown hair, brown eyes, a smile that looked exactly like Brendan's. "Her name is Paige Holloway," Ruth said. "She's 28 years old. She lives in Springfield, Massachusetts, and she is your mother's biological daughter." I composed the message to Paige 17 times before hitting send. 24 hours later, my phone rang. "Is this Sloan?" The voice was shaky, uncertain, but something in it felt familiar. "My whole life," Paige said. "People told me I don't look like my parents. My dad used to joke that maybe the hospital made a mistake." A long pause. I guess it wasn't a joke after all. We talked for 3 hours that night. By the end, we'd agreed to take another DNA test, this one comparing Paige to Warren and Carolyn. The results would be ready in 10 days, just in time for my engagement party. When they arrived, the numbers were clear. Paige Holloway showed a 99.97% genetic match with Warren Hargrove and a 99.98% match with Carolyn Hargrove. She was their biological daughter, the daughter Warren had been searching for. And she'd been living in Massachusetts her entire life because a hospital made a mistake and chose to hide it. The engagement party was held at my grandmother's estate. 60 guests arrived in cocktail attire, including every single person who had received Warren's accusatory email. He came late, of course, wearing a designer suit and a smirk that told me he thought this was his victory lap. He had no idea. When he took the microphone to give his speech, he pulled out a copy of my DNA results, read the 0% matches aloud, and turned to Carolyn. "You lied to me, Diane. You lied to everyone." The silence that followed was absolute. And then I walked to the stage and took the microphone from his hand. "You're right," I said. "The DNA test shows I'm not your biological daughter, and I'm not Mom's biological daughter either." "But not because Mom had an affair." I nodded toward the side door. Paige stepped through, 28 years old, brown hair, brown eyes, a jawline that was unmistakably, undeniably Warren's. "This is Paige Holloway," I said. "She was born 11 minutes before me at St. Blee, Mary's Hospital, on the same night I was born." A trainee nurse mixed up 2 babies after bathing them. The hospital covered it up to avoid a lawsuit. The wall-mounted display flickered to life, showing Paige's DNA results. "She is your biological daughter, Warren. And this is Ruth Calloway, the head nurse who was there. She has a notarized statement confirming everything." Ruth stepped forward, her voice shaky but clear. "Mr. Hargrove, I was there. I watched it happen. Your wife never betrayed you. Never. The hospital made us all sign NDAs. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Warren's hands gripped the edge of the platform. His face had gone completely white. Then his knees buckled. He caught himself on one knee, his chest heaving. "I didn't know," he whispered. "How could I have known?" "You could have trusted her," I said quietly. "You could have looked for other explanations instead of assuming the worst about the woman who loved you." Carolyn stepped forward, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. 28 years, she said, her voice steadier than I had ever heard it. "I stayed because I loved you, because I believed someday you would trust me. You owe me an apology in front of every person who received that email. You owe Sloane an apology for every birthday you ruined, every graduation you ignored, every moment you made her feel like she didn't belong. And you owe Paige an apology for being the father she deserved but never had." She turned her back on him and walked to where Paige stood. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm your mother. I'm so sorry it took so long to find you." Warren's apology, when it finally came, was 3 words. 28 years overdue. I was wrong. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something other than suspicion in his eyes. "I'll repay your student loans," he said. "All of them. It's not enough, but it's a start." Then he turned to Paige, this stranger who was his daughter, and his voice shattered. "I've missed everything. Your first steps, your graduations, your entire life. That's something I'll regret until the day I die." Paige was crying too. "We can start now," she said, "if you're willing to actually be a father instead of a judge." 2 months later, I married Declan in my grandmother's rose garden. My mother walked me down the aisle. Not Warren, my mother. She wore champagne and held her head high, her steps steady for the first time in decades. Paige stood with my bridesmaids. Claire Holloway, my biological mother, sat in the front row. And when Vivienne rose to give a toast, her voice carried across the entire garden. "This wedding is not just about 2 people. It's about 2 families finally finding their way back to the truth." "To truth," she said, raising her glass. "However long it takes." "To truth," the room echoed. And I drank to that. DNA doesn't make a family. The woman who held my hand during nightmares, who taught me to read, who stayed married to a man who made her life a battlefield just to keep our family together. That is my mother, not biology.